Alright, hello everybody, and welcome back to Mistaken Truths. So in the last episode, we talked about the entire Welcome with Dinosaurs trilogy, which took forever, up to 2 hours. But now we're only going to talk about a single documentary, When Dinosaurs Roamed America, which is essentially the American version of Walking with Dinosaurs. I swear, they might have, like, Discovery and BBC might have been working together on that, and, like, made their own versions for like, both the British and the American demographic, because there's just, like, look at the box art for both of them, it's practically identical. And I feel like, considering how close they came together, that couldn't be a coincidence. I feel like it's too soon. I feel like both of them came out so close to each other that they couldn't have ripped off each other either. So, just like, I don't know, it's really weird. But besides that, yeah, When Dinosaurs Roamed America. It's very, very interesting. This is obviously going to be a much shorter episode because, you know, 90 minutes instead of several hours long. So yeah, let's begin, I suppose. Alright, so the first thing that they sort of referenced was the Permian Extinction event, which was the most dramatic extinction event in all of Earth's history. Killed 95% of all life on Earth. And When Dinosaurs Roamed America, it only talked about it briefly to start off, like, the life of the dinosaurs. And it essentially said that it was caused by a meteorite strike. Which, as far as we know, was probably not the case. Note the probably. The extinction caused by the dinosaurs is one of the few extinction events that has very, very conclusive proof of the cause. Most of the other ones are somewhat raveled in mystery. But the Permian one in particular, the most likely cause of the extinction event was the Siberian traps, which was a region in what is now central northern Russia, which was essentially what happened is, you know, like in Yellowstone National Park, there's an underground volcano that's set to erupt at any second that can drastically affect the North American climate. Well, imagine that, except when this went off, it was 100,000 times worse, essentially. Thousands upon thousands of tons of carbon dioxide gas went into the atmosphere and essentially caused the same thing as the meteor strike that killed off the dinosaurs. Except, once again, much, much, much worse, essentially. So yeah, this is sort of a reconstruction of the aftermath of that. We got a Gorgonopsid, an early dinosaur relative it looks like, and then Lycosaurus here. None? Alright, so now we're on to Coelophysis. And this is actually going to get really, really complicated because I'm not exactly sure if they meant to do this, but they kind of showed two versions of the same dinosaur, kinda, in the same episode. It's really, really confusing. I mean, not in the same episode, but it's just really, really confusing, alright? You'll see what I mean in a second. So, in the first segment, it took place during the late Triassic, 220 million years ago, and it showed Coelophysis, right here. And then, over here, they went to the early Jurassic, and it had Syntarsis, which looks very, very similar to Coelophysis, and that is not a coincidence, because it's just really, really confusing. So if you look here, you'll see 4 different species of dinosaur. With the exception of this one here, all 3 of these are now classed as Coelophysis, just Coelophysis, including Syntarsis. So here we have Coelophysis borii, which I believe is supposed to be this one. This is the main species from Walking with Dinosaurs as well. This is the main one when we think of Coelophysis. And then we got Coelophysis Kayentakaday. It's very long names. And it's the crested one, which indicates that this might be the species in question. And this is one that's apparently was also called Syntarsis, but then we also got this one up here, which is Coelophysis rhodesiensis. This is the African species. And this one was also called Syntarsis, however, also went under the name Megpansaurus. Like, at first it was Coelophysis and Syntarsis, and then Syntarsis kind of got turned to Megpansaurus, but then Megpansaurus and Syntarsis were together, and all 3 of them were different, but now it's just really, really confusing. But essentially, all of them are now under the Coelophysis genus, basically. So, them being distinguished as 2 different dinosaurs is a bit mixed. Aside from that, however, it's alright. They look better than the ones in Walking with Dinosaurs, I believe. This Coelophysis looks much better than the one Walking with Dinosaurs. The only issue I can find with it is the pronated hands, but besides that, it's not bad. It looks pretty good to me. The other main issue is it has the same problem as the one Walking with Dinosaurs, also with the time placement. They were actually accurate during this time period. They did live at this point in the documentary, but at this point it was too early. They wouldn't have evolved yet. Coelophysis lived in the Triassic-Jurassic boundary area around 200 or so million years ago, but it did not live 220 million years ago when this segment took place. It's far, far, far too early. Moving on, we got Icarosaurus, which is a gliding reptile. It was essentially just an offhand reference. They didn't really talk about it much, except that it was the first reptile that knew how to glide, which is not accurate. One of the earliest gliding reptiles was well-known Coelurosaur, well-known from Primeval, lived during the late Permian. And then you also got some other gliding reptiles that lived during the early Triassic. I forgot what these are called. I believe it's Shorovictrix or something like that, but don't quote me on that. Essentially, this was not the first gliding reptile. There were others that came before it. And then we got the Oh wait, hold on. One more thing about Coelophysis that I forgot to mention. This is one of the biggest issues I think that this documentary has. It's a great documentary. I think it's second to Walking with Dinosaurs as the best one ever made, I think, personally. But one of the biggest issues with the documentary is its issues with scaling, right? So, the Coelophysis, in shots by itself, is... This one didn't have this problem, but the Syntarsis, as it's called, didn't have this problem, but the Coelophysis did. In shots by itself, it was shown to be fairly adequately sized. Coelophysis is around... Just for some context, Coelophysis is around 3 meters long. Rutiodon, which is also shown in the episode, is 6 meters, about 3 to 8, 6 meters, and Desmatosuchus is 4 meters. So when all three of these went together, there was a bit of a mishap, as it were. The Desmatosuchus and Rutiodon together, they look to scale. They fit quite well together. But then Coelophysis comes in, and it's like the size of a compy. It was incredibly weird. I don't understand why they made it so tiny. I guess it was sort of allude that although Coelophysis had its own game going, it was not at the top of the food chain. But still, I really don't get it. So now the Triassic Extinction event. This is probably one of the more obscure extinction events, and it's also probably it's one of the smallest mass extinctions. It definitely killed off a lot of prehistoric life, but it was not as drastic as, say, the one that killed off the dinosaurs or the one that ended the Permian period. But yeah, they also said this one was happened by an asteroid, which, although has somewhat more ground than the Permian one, is also probably not as likely. Most sources that I see sort of match up the Triassic Extinction with the breakup of Pangaea across the Atlantic boundary when the Atlantic Ocean was forming. And what this did was, because of the sudden tectonic activity of Pangaea actually breaking apart, it caused a surge of volcanoes to erupt, which surged CO2 and other volcanic gases in the atmosphere. And the arrival of of an entire ocean where there hasn't been before essentially caused drastic worldwide climate change that a lot of animals couldn't adapt to. But the dinosaurs survived, and that is how we continue on. So in the first Jurassic segment, we got Anchisaurus, which has some of the typical problems that you see with prosauropods from this time period. Prosauropods were purely bipedal. They could not go quadrupedal like theropod dinosaurs. So that was one issue that they showed with it in the documentary. Albeit unlike with the Plateosaurs in Walking with Dinosaurs, they showed it as mostly bipedal and occasionally crashing down on all fours, which I think is alright. Once again, much better than walking with dinosaurs in that regard. But yeah, still not quadrupedal in any sense. However, the other major issue with Ankylosaurus is its size. So in the episode, they didn't give a clear size range, but it towered over the Coelophysis, which are once again about 3 meters long. And then it was smaller, but it was similar in size to the 6 meter long Dilophosaurus. However, in real life, it was smaller than both of them, at only around 6 meters. Coelophysis dwarfed the Ankylosaurus. It was very, very small. And then over here you got Dilophosaurus, probably one of the greatest looking and sounding dinosaurs in this documentary ever. If there's any dinosaur that essentially made its mark in this documentary, it is this one, easily. But the general appearance and behavior is alright, but the main issue comes from its time placement. So the episode takes the segment. I'm so used to saying the episode thing from Walking with Dinosaurs, forgive me. The main segment, the early Jurassic segment, takes place in the Hectangian at the very, very, very beginning of the Jurassic period, just when the Triassic ended. And while Coelophysis and Ankylosaurus lived during this age of time, Dilophosaurus did not. It was in the Cinemorian, which was about 195 million years ago. So, not quite. Shouldn't have been around yet, my friend. So yeah, now we're going to have a little lesson on Theropod Taxonomy. So, this is once again a one-off line, but it does have quite some significance. So, back during this time period, there wasn't as much knowledge about how Theropod Taxonomy worked. Essentially, there was like 3 main groups. There were the Coelurosaurs, which, that compared to the other two, didn't really change much, but then the other two, the Carnosaurs, which consisted of what is now known as the Allosauroids and the Megalosauroids, which are things like the Megalosaurus, the Streptospondylus, and the Spinosaurs. And then there were the Ceratosaurs, which consisted of many of the early Triassic theropods like Coelophysis, as well as Ceratosaurus, Deltadromeus, Coelophysaurus, Dilophosaurus, and so on, and that's why they said that they were both Ceratosaurs. They were both in the same family, which at the time was correct, but not anymore. The theropod family tree since then has gotten quite a bit more expansive. Essentially, it's a lot less concrete. Both of these dinosaurs in particular are a bit vague on where they're placed. Coelophysis is a bit more concrete. It is placed in the There's a whole Coelophysoid group of dinosaurs, which consists of things like Coelophysis, Liliensternus, Quelurosaurus, and so on. But Dilophosaurus is very, very obscure. It's actually heavily debated on where exactly this guy fits on the theropod family tree. There's some that thinks that it too is a Coelophysoid, like Coelophysis. Others think that it might have been a megalosaur. Some think that it was an early Tetanuran, or one of the more bird-like theropod dinosaurs that Megalosaurs, Allosaurs, and Coelurosaurs evolved into. Coelophysaurus is considered a basal Tetanuran. And then it's also been placed in a group of its own, the Dilophosaurs, which was it's sort of like a hypothetical group that's been proposed, and it consists of mostly Dilophosaurus, Coelophysaurus, Dracovenator, and Sinosaurus. Essentially all of those 4 dinosaurs together as a group, but I don't think there's enough evidence to quite support that yet. But yeah, regardless of where they fit, neither of them are Ceratosaurs, and I don't know, these two might be related more than we think. We're not too sure right now. Dilophosaurus' the taxonomical relationships are incredibly vague as of now. Moving on to the late Jurassic segment, we have Dryosaurus, which is better than the one in Walking with Dinosaurs, but it still has the same issues, essentially. The general body plan is fine, but it has the pronated hands, as well as lack of feather covering, as most small ornithopods probably had. And then we have the Apatosaurus. The main issues with the Apatosaurus are ones that were just typical of sauropods from the time. The main horizontal neck, which was thought to have been in most sauropod dinosaurs is now considered incorrect. It should be a half vertical, half horizontal position. This is the case with most sauropods. The main exceptions are the more vertical ones, like Brachiosaurus and Coelurosaurus. But even then, they had their necks horizontal a little bit, you know. And then there's also the odd, well, not really odd, just more misconstrued spines on the Apatosaurus. This is most likely because the Apatosaurus' close relative Diplodocus is known to have these spines that run down its neck and back, but they are not known in Apatosaurus, as far as I know, so it probably would have looked more along the lines of this. Which, speaking of which, this picture is not actually of Apatosaurus. It's of its very, very, very close relative Brontosaurus, but still, they look very, very similar, so it would have looked generally more like this than like this. Alright, so the Allosaurus. This is where the scaling issues come back into play. So there's actually a lot of issues with the Allosaurus. You figured they'd hype it up more, as it's like the top predator of the Jurassic period. However, it really doesn't get a lot of screen time, and it isn't really hyped up all that much. It just sort of shows up, and is just kind of there for a majority of the time that it's in. So, you also don't get a lot of good looks at it either. You sort of just see a ton of one-off shots, and that's the end of it. So, I might as well talk about the scaling issues first, because like the Coelophysis, this guy's got issues. They are shown to be massive, and I mean massive in some shots. Like, look at this, for example. It is like 3 times the size of the Ceratosaurus that it's currently chowing down on. It is rather ridiculous. Most Allosaurs were like 8, 9, 10 meters, about, not 12 plus. Kind of ridiculous. And even then, we don't know exactly what they disclose their size as. We've never gotten like a very clear statement on that. Aside from that, in terms of aesthetic, it's got a very, very weird design going on. The crests are correct, but everything else is really, really off. It looks a lot like the Papo Allosaurus. As you can see here, it's got this very, very more raptor-looking body plan, as well as this very, very Tyrannosaur oval-shaped head, or U alligator-shaped head, which is very, very odd. Allosaurus had this more triangular crocodile-like head rather than the U-shaped alligator-like one. It's very, very weird. And then it's also very shrink-wrapped in some places. Like, you can very clearly see the ribs in this picture, despite it being blurry as hell, you know? Just seems like very, very missed opportunity overall on the Allosaurus' part. Alright, so now starting off to the late Cretaceous, and the very, very confusing prospect of the Raptors. Now, even as a child, when I first watched When Dinosaurs Roamed America, I gotta give him credit. Very first feathered dinosaurs put into film ever. Gotta give them the applause on that. Very, very groundbreaking for the time. But besides that, these guys in general are just weird. I really don't understand. It's been an absolute mystery as to what even this dinosaur is. We know it's a raptor, but what else? We don't know its species. We've looked at the general raptor family tree and have tried to find a possible match, but everything we've come up with is just nothing. The only 2 main matches that have been come up with are Deinonychus, which lived about 10 million years before the events of this documentary, and Dromaeosaurus, which lived like 20 million years after this. So it's very, very odd. And I've also tried to look into the Zuni formation itself and see if there's sort of like some raptor bones possibly found there that weren't really described yet, if that's possible, but no, that never came up either. They just wanted a place to put in raptors, I guess, but couldn't really find a good place to put them. Aside from that though, what general raptor things do they get wrong? Well, I do approve of the feathers. I like that. But there are a couple of issues with the design. There is a sheer lack of wings, which as far as we know, all raptors had wings in some form. And they also showed the raptor hunting method of just slashing into the guts of their prey, which once again is not correct. They most likely pulled what is now known as raptor prey restraint, where they use their sickle claws to hold on to the animal and then use their teeth to do the main work. It's very, very similar to eagles, except, you know, on the ground. Alright, so Zuniceratops, there's not much to talk. There will be segments on the ceratopsids, but there's really not much to talk about. Overall, I think they're alright. However, my main issue is the tail. It is incredibly bizarre why they made this decision. It is parallel to the body and suddenly droops down, which is very odd. Ceratopsids are one of the few dinosaurs where, as far as we know, they didn't have their tails directly horizontal like this. They sort of curved down and sort of sloped off nearer to the ground, which it sort of reminds me of the arc Triceratops, basically, when in reality it should have been more like the Saurian Triceratops, possibly. This is another Zuniceratops for reference, which even has it has something similar to this, but it's still much better regardless. Alright, so the Coelurosaurs that were in this segment. This, I feel, is like the biggest travesty of this documentary. It's been literally 20 years, practically, since this came out, and this species has yet to be properly described or given a name. However, I did manage to find information on this guy. So, these Coelurosaurs, they've been, once again, still don't have an official name, so we're just going to call them Coelurosaurs. There seems to have been a little bit of debate, but so far the main consensus is that it is a basal Tyrannosaur of some form. Whether it's a more basal form like D-Long, or whether it is a very early Tyrannosaurid, and Tyrannosaurs include the big ones like T-Rex and Albertosaurus, nobody really knows. But looking at the skeleton, there's an actual skeleton of it, by the way, which is right here. I managed to find this online, of the Tyrannosauroid. It's probably a Tyrannosauroid, given it has 3 fingers instead of 2, so just gonna say that right now. And everywhere I've looked, it's sort of been compared to D-Long, which this is a picture of. So odds are it probably looked more like this in life than of the... These guys look more like a typical Coelurosaurus, rather than a small Tyrannosauroid type animal. The very, very triangular heads rather than the U-shaped ones here. Alright, so Nothronychus. One of, I believe, 2 Therizinosaurs only known for North America, outside of Asia. It is shown pretty well. It has feathers. It is shown to be pretty easygoing and, you know, just generally portrayed well because it just showed off how weird the Therizinosaurs were. However, it does have one main flaw, which is not only does it have pronated hands, like pretty much all the theropods do in this documentary, but it also is pretty underfeathered. It only has a shaggy coat on the top of it, with a scaly underbelly, with scaly underside in general. Like, it's like the top half is feathered while the bottom half is scaly, which is quite weird. In contrast to the full downy coating that other documentaries show, such as Planet Dinosaurs, Nothronychus. But yeah, besides that, it's alright. One thing that I'm just going to tease is that there's quite a bit of controversy over this Zuniceratops here, which we will get into when we talk about Planet Dinosaur. Alright, so hitting the final segment, we got Struthiomimus, which is shown very, very briefly in very, very small cameos. It's a sort of blink and you'll miss it type of thing. And online, it only exists as very, very blurry images, essentially. But yeah, it wasn't even mentioned by name either. So essentially, they did this guy pretty good. It's got pretty much a full coating of feathers. The only exceptions are the legs and the neck, but that's pretty acceptable, I think. Even most accurate feathered orthomimid depictions today have a very similar thing going on. But the main issues that derive from it are in its arm anatomy, basically. So once again, it may or may not have the pruning hands. I'm actually not too sure, but by the looks of things here in this picture, it probably does. And it also lacks wings, which while not as definite as, say, the Dromaeosaurs or Raptors, it probably had them as well, given of what we know about the more bird-like Coelurosaurs. Triceratops. This one, not much to talk about. Pretty much the same thing as the Zuniceratops. It's better than the Zuniceratops, but still kind of awkward, with how its tail is parallel to the body and then just droops down, which is very, very odd. Its tail should be a bit more like this, you know? Quetzalcoatlus. So this one, unlike the one in Walking with Dinosaurs, actually had a bit of depth to it, and it was actually a character that was mentioned more than just a one-off scene. Just looking at it from this picture, there's already a couple of glaring issues. It is missing pycnofibers, which all pterosaurs are known to have, and its crest is also this weird bulbous look, which is quite odd. It personally reminds me of the nose of the male gharial of India, but yeah, it instead had a more bladed half-circle crest rather than a bulbous one like shown here. Aside from that though, it also has one issue in terms of its lifestyle. So, when dinosaurs roamed America, it showed what was the depiction that was popular at the time of it essentially just being a giant vulture. Giant scavengers, basically, that fed on the corpses of dead animals. However, in reality, it was probably more of a ground hunter, like, say, a ground stork like a marabou. It probably hunted animals, probably as big as small dinosaurs. Alright, so now moving on. This is going to be another quick one. So, what was called a titan in the documentary is actually now known as Edmontosaurus, or maybe Edmontosaurus if you want to if you're like one of the main Saurian backers who thinks that they should still be two different genus. I'm personally neutral of that. I honestly do not care, but aside from the name change, they're quite alright. They seem a little bit shrink-wrapped in some places, but overall they seem alright. The head in particular seems quite shrink-wrapped, I think, but aside from that, they're alright. So the final thing that we're going to talk about before we end this episode is the Tyrannosaurus. Now, I may have shown a lot of pics here, and that's just because there is a lot to talk about. So the Tyrannosaurus scenes are probably the most sensational out of this documentary. Let me just say real quick though, that is much better than the one Walking with Dinosaurs. This one right here looks like an actual T-Rex. It is not the E.T. if E.T. was a dinosaur looking T-Rex that we got in Walking with Dinosaurs. It is much better. But aside from that, it does have its own share of issues. It showed some very, very awkward scenes where it burst out of the bushes roaring, and yeah, this meme basically sums it up. Hardly attainable food source, easily attainable food source, jumps over it. Mind you, this is a carnivore that has to at least weigh a couple of tons. This was a younger Tyrannosaur, so it probably didn't weigh the full 6 to 9 tons that an adult Tyrannosaurus could get. But it was still must have been several tons at this point. It could not jump over a Triceratops like that. That is ridiculous. And what's furthermore the issue with it is scaling once again returns. It's said that the Tyrannosaurus in this particular scene was 17 feet long, yet it towered over all the Triceratops that it came in contact with, which could have easily have been 7 to 9 meters in length. It's ridiculous. And 17 feet, that's about 5 meters, in case you're wondering. But, yeah, rather ridiculous. But aside from that though, what actual nitpicky scientific stuff is there to talk about? Well, the first thing is there was this one-off comment that said females were bigger than the males. That is purely speculation. We do not actually know if female Tyrannosaurs were larger than the males. It is purely a speculative idea that caught on because of how with modern birds of prey, the females tend to be slightly larger than the males. But aside from that though, purely speculation. There's absolutely no grounding behind it. And the other thing is, with how the younger Tyrannosaurs are depicted, I'm not exactly sure whether these are meant to be teenagers or just younger adults. But I do appreciate that they at least wanted to show that the youngsters were smaller, more nimble, more lightweight than the adults were, which is true. You can see here in the Dinosaur Revolution Rexes, you got an adult here, which is big skull, burly body, just in general, very, very huge and heavy animal. And then you got the juvenile over here, which is a lot sleeker. It's got longer and slightly more bladed teeth. It has very, very thin jaws. It is quite a bit different. So, yeah, I think at the end of that rant, aside from that, they did it quite good. It was a breath of fresh air after watching A Welcome to Dinosaurs to see a T-Rex that looked like an actual T-Rex, but it does have some issues of its own, which sort of go down to more plot problems rather than actual scientific inaccuracies. But aside from that, those alright. Still got the protein hands issue of all theropods, but I don't know. I don't know whether or not I should keep repeating myself or not on that regard, but might as well still do, just in case, you know. So yeah, everybody, that was the end of When Dinosaurs Roamed America. So yeah, it was obviously much, much shorter, only an hour and a half long compared to the several hours worth of documentaries that we got out of the Walking with trilogy, so there's a lot less to cover, and in general, it was more accurate than Walking with Dinosaurs. So yeah, on that note, I have to pretty much applaud it in that regard, and I also have to thank all you guys for joining me on this. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed. Hope you all learned something new. If I missed something in the comments, let me know. I don't... It feels weird to end it this soon after finishing something like the Walking with Dinosaurs one, but we'll see. They're probably going to be a size to this from here on out. So, yeah. On that note, I hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye, everyone.